Chapter 4. Trista had reluctantly agreed to let me stay the night on her sofa, though her father wasn't pleased about it. He grumbled under his breath when I arrived, his disapproving gaze following my every move. The tension in their home was so thick that I could barely breathe, making it impossible to relax. I spent the night tossing and turning, eager for morning to come so I could leave the stifling atmosphere behind. As soon as the first rays of light peeked through the curtains, I was up and out, heading straight for the library where I hoped to find some peace. When I arrived, I found Jack already there, seated at a long wooden table surrounded by stacks of papers and flickering candlelight. His white hair seemed to glow faintly in the dim room, contrasting with the dark shadows cast by the swirling snow outside the windows. The storm had swallowed the sky, and the only illumination came from the soft, dancing flames of the candles that dotted the tables. Jack was completely engrossed in his work, scribbling furiously in his notebook while referring to a large chart spread out before him. The chart caught my attention immediately. It was filled with names, rows and rows of girls' names, each followed by a series of columns. Jack was methodically ticking off boxes, his quill moving with precision. Curious, I slid onto the bench beside him, the old wood creaking softly under my weight. I was glad to find the library empty, just the two of us and the quiet hum of the storm outside. "What exactly were we all being judged on last night?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice echoed slightly in the vast space, and Jack glanced up, startled by my sudden appearance. "I didn't think you'd be here this early," he said, his lips curving into a small smile as he shifted to make room for me at the table. "I figured everyone would still be sleeping after the ball. Kodiak usually wakes me up at the crack of dawn to take him out. I guess my body's just used to it. I'm guessing it's the same for you with your dogs?" I leaned over, trying to get a better look at the chart. "So, how did everyone do?" Jack quickly placed his pale hand over the paper, shielding it from view. His expression was a mixture of amusement and determination. "I can't tell you," he said, his tone teasing. "You're going to get ink all over your hands," I pointed out, raising an eyebrow at his attempt to hide the list. "There are worse things," he replied with a smirk. "You're so secretive," I exclaimed, leaning closer. "Just tell me already." Jack hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the paper. Finally, he sighed and looked at me with a serious expression. "If I tell you, you have to promise not to repeat it to anyone. Do you promise?" "I promise," I said without hesitation, curiosity burning inside me. Slowly, he lifted his hand, revealing one of the names written neatly in the chart. My eyes immediately landed on the name Noel in one of the rows, with a bold checkmark under a column titled Attractiveness. "So, last night was basically just a beauty contest?" I asked, my brow furrowing in disbelief. Jack shrugged, his expression almost apologetic. "Well, initial attraction is an important part of any courtship," he said, trying to justify it. "I mean, I knew you'd pass easily." "Excuse me, sir," I said, my tone laced with playful sarcasm. "That competition was for the prince's benefit, not yours," Jack chuckled, a mischievous glint in his vivid blue eyes. "I still have eyes, don't I? What do you think I was scribbling notes about all night?" I blinked at him, genuinely surprised. "Wait, are you saying the prince had you rate everyone based on their looks?" "Not exactly," he replied, shifting uncomfortably. "It wasn't just me. The prince and his advisors were the ones doing the judging. If Stephen, the prince, liked someone, he'd kiss her hand. If he wasn't interested, he'd simply bow. That was their way of making decisions." The thought of being evaluated solely on my physical appearance left a sour taste in my mouth. "That's unsettling," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "I know," Jack said, his tone softening. "It wasn't exactly my favorite part of the evening." "So, who passed me?" I asked, unable to resist the question. He smirked again, clearly enjoying my curiosity. "I did," but he admitted, leaning back slightly. "I thought you said you couldn't judge." "But I'm the one holding the paper," he said with a sly grin. "Wait, so you're saying I wasn't supposed to pass?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at him. "No, that's not it," he said quickly, his expression turning serious. "The prince liked you, and the advisors recommended you too. But even if they hadn't, I would have fought to keep you here." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a small flutter in my chest. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "You've done so much for me already. I owe you. How about that ice skating lesson? When are you free?" "Maybe tonight, after the ball," he suggested. "Octavius is handling the dismissals today, and he seems to enjoy it, so I'll be free later." "Perfect," I said, smiling at the thought. A sudden question popped into my mind. "Do you know if my stepsisters Valia and Vanessa passed?" Jack glanced at his notes. "Yes, they both did." The prince and advisors found them very attractive. My chest tightened at his words, a knot forming in my stomach. "Do you think they're beautiful?" I asked hesitantly. "They're not my type," he said firmly, his gaze meeting mine. The tension in my chest eased, and I couldn't help but smile. "What about my friend Trista? She has red hair and wore a green dress. Did she pass?" Jack winced slightly. "No, she didn't. I'm sorry." "She'll be thrilled," I said with a laugh. "She's in love with the blacksmith's apprentice and was hoping to be sent home," Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "That explains a lot. The advisors who danced with her said her manners were less than ideal." "She did that on purpose," I explained. "She's not usually like that." "I figured as much," he said, turning back to his notes. I watched him work for a moment, wishing I had an excuse to stay longer. "Can I help you with anything?" "This part is something only I can do," he replied, giving me a small, grateful smile. "But I appreciate the offer." I nodded and sat back, watching the flickering candlelight dance across the room as Jack continued his work. "I'll feed your dogs before I come back here to work on my research," I said. "I'd take them for a run, but I'm not sure how to set up the rigging." Jack smiled softly. "That's okay. I'll take them out later, but feeding them would be a big help." He looked at me with warmth in his eyes. "I'm really glad we're friends." I enjoyed spending time in the barn with Jack's dogs. Feeding and watering them felt peaceful. Their excitement was contagious. They wagged their tails so vigorously that their entire bodies wiggled with joy. They barked and howled, winding around my legs as if their happiness couldn't be contained. I couldn't help but think about Kodiak. How long would it be until I could see him again? The village wasn't too far, but the snowstorm raging outside made the journey dangerous. The wind whipped snow against the windows, piling drifts so high they blocked the view. Walking to Beryl's shop in weather like this wasn't worth the risk. Getting caught in a blizzard could disorient me, and I might freeze to death before finding shelter. When I re-entered the castle, Octavius scurried toward me, his face tight with frustration. "Where have you been?" "I've been looking everywhere for you," he exclaimed, shoving a sealed envelope into my hands. "You may stay here. There's another ball tonight and a grand feast tomorrow at sundown." Behind him, a sour-faced girl struggled to drag a heavy trunk across the hall. She threw me a sharp glare when she saw the envelope in my hands. Clearly, some people had already received their rejections. "Thank you," I said, trying to sound polite. Yes, very good," Octavius muttered dismissively. "I have much to do. If you'll excuse me," he bustled off, waddling in his usual hurried manner to attend to other duties. I made my way to Trista's room, where I found her parents furiously packing bags. Trista helped, her face set in a solemn expression that I didn't believe for a second. "I didn't make it to the next round," Trista said, keeping up her act. "So much for marrying a prince," her father grumbled. "Now we'll have to settle for a blacksmith's apprentice." Trista bit her lip, trying to hide a smile. "All that money spent on a wardrobe," her mother sighed. "At least Cal is a nice boy, and he loves her." Trista's father hefted a large bag. "Come on, then we'll send a footman for the rest." As her parents headed toward the door, Trista lingered for a moment. She glanced cautiously at her father before handing me a bag. "Here's another dress, in case you need it. And your laundered dress came back. It's hanging in the closet." "I'll make sure to return your dress," I promised. "Don't worry about it. Just come to my wedding, and that'll be thanks enough," Trista said with a soft smile. "Trista!" her father barked from the hallway. "I'm coming!" she called. Turning back to me, she added, "Goodbye, Noelle. I'll send an invitation." "Bye," I said, watching her hurry after her parents. As their footsteps faded, I realized that with Trista gone, I might have this room to myself. I began tidying up, setting her family's bag by the door for the footman to collect. But my hope of claiming the room didn't last long. Octavius returned just a few minutes later, leading a small army of housekeepers. "This room is next," he announced, then spotted me. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I could use this room since Trista is gone," I explained. No, absolutely not," Octavius exclaimed, jabbing his finger at the ledger in his hands. "I have everything meticulously organized. You are assigned to the Frost family rooms and you must stay there. Otherwise, it throws off the entire system." "But if no one's using this room," I started. Octavius's face turned red as his cheeks puffed up in frustration. "Not using it? What nonsense! We have dignitaries arriving." "Rooms to deep clean. Additional preparations to manage." Okay, I'm leaving," I said quickly. Grabbing my laundered dress and cloak from the closet, I clutched the bag Trista had given me and edged past Octavius and the housekeepers. "Sorry to trouble you." I left the room, silently wishing someone would bother Octavius for a change. His fussiness reminded me of the steward back at Frostwood Estate. As a child, I had admired how efficiently he ran things, but now that I was the one needing an exception to the rules, it felt frustrating. I sighed and made my way to the library. Jack was there, surrounded by several advisors. They spoke in hushed tones, pointing at lists, their heads close together. Prince Stephen, however, was nowhere to be seen. It amused me that he wasn't involved in the discussions about choosing his future wife. If it were me, I'd want to be present for such decisions. I turned my attention to the towering bookshelves. Jack had mentioned laws and regulations about inheritances, and I was determined to find something useful. I grabbed one heavy tome after another until my arms were full, then staggered to an armchair and dropped the stack onto the table. I scanned the titles and selected a thick, dull-looking book about the laws governing lords and their estates. It was tedious reading, but I pressed on, searching for any shred of helpful information. As I buried myself in the text, a bearded scribe walked by and noticed my mountain of books. "Interesting choice of reading material for a young lady," he remarked. "Are you interested in legal matters?" "Yes, very much," I replied with sudden inspiration. "I actually hope to become a scribe one day. I've heard there's a room reserved for scribes and was wondering if I might get a tour." I smiled, hoping to win him over. He frowned slightly. "I'm afraid that room is only for scribes who have completed their training. But perhaps one day, miss." "Thank you," I said, hiding my disappointment. The scribe walked away and I returned to my books, more determined than ever to uncover something that could help me. "Of course, I'll work harder to earn that privilege," I said, forcing a smile to hide the growing knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. As the words left my mouth, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. Jack. He had been organizing a shelf of books near the far corner of the library, but now he stood still, his hand hovering over the spine of a volume. He raised an eyebrow ever so slightly, a subtle, silent acknowledgement that he'd overheard my reply. Before I could react, he quickly returned to his task, careful to avoid drawing any attention from the other advisors who milled about, their expressions stoic and unreadable. The morning crawled by at an excruciatingly slow pace. Determined not to let frustration consume me, I immersed myself in research, poring over book after book. The library's vast collection offered plenty to explore, but every promising lead seemed to dissolve into irrelevance as I sifted through dusty tomes and faded records. I scribbled notes fervently, searching for any detail that could connect to the inheritance dispute. But my efforts yielded little more than a growing pile of crumpled papers. By the time noon arrived, my stomach's protests reminded me I'd skipped breakfast. Lunch was a subdued affair. The dining room buzzed with conversations that barely reached my ears. My focus remained on the task at hand, the uneaten bread on my plate a testament to my distracted state. As soon as I could, I hurried back to the library, determined to squeeze more productivity from the day. But the problem was, fatigue began to creep in as the hours ticked by. The library's cozy atmosphere, its towering shelves bathed in soft sunlight, the soothing crackle of a nearby fireplace soon became my enemy. Words on the pages blurred, merging into an indecipherable haze. My head nodded forward once, then twice, before I finally succumbed, drifting into a light, restless sleep at the desk. A sharp, deliberate cough jolted me awake. My heart leapt into my throat as I blinked rapidly, disoriented. The heavy book I'd been reading now lay askew on the desk, its pages fanned out haphazardly. Outside, the faint rays of sunlight filtering through the library's high windows had shifted, signaling the late afternoon. Nearby, two advisors stood conversing in low tones, though their words carried easily in the quiet space. "It's truly a shame when some individuals lack the dedication this process requires," one said, his tone dripping with disapproval. "Yes, quite," the other agreed. "Imagine falling asleep while so many others give their all. Such behavior hardly reflects a serious contender." Though their eyes never met mine, the pointed nature of their remarks stung. Heat rose to my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and frustration, but I bit my tongue, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I stood abruptly, hastily returning the book to its place on the shelf before leaving the library altogether. Downstairs, the atmosphere was starkly different. The grand hall echoed with the sounds of laughter, music, and animated chatter as the women gathered for their afternoon activities. The ornate space was alive with color and movement. Women flitted from one station to another, showcasing their talents. Some painted delicate landscapes, their brushes gliding effortlessly over canvases, while others filled the room with the hauntingly beautiful notes of string instruments. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers, mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and parchment. I hesitated at the doorway, clutching Trista's bag of spare clothes. The weight of my own insecurities pressed down on me as I observed the scene. Compared to their elegance and poise, I felt woefully out of place, an intruder in their world of refined artistry, yet the ever-watchful eyes of the advisors left me no choice but to step forward, my chin held high in an attempt to mask my uncertainty. Despite my initial apprehension, I soon found solace in the familiar realm of academics. While others dazzled with their artistic flair, I excelled in tasks that required intellect and strategy. Penmanship, geography, and governance, these were my strengths, and I wielded them with confidence. My demonstration of Neva's trade routes and legal processes drew nods of approval from several advisors, their expressions softening ever so slightly. But not everyone was impressed. Vanessa, perched gracefully at a nearby harp, observed my performance with thinly veiled disdain. Her icy blue eyes narrowed, and a smug smile tugged at her lips as she plucked the strings of her instrument, filling the room with an enchanting melody that seemed designed to overshadow my achievements. Our gazes met briefly, and I held hers, unflinching. As the afternoon gave way to evening, the women dispersed to prepare for the upcoming ball. The atmosphere shifted once again, the air buzzing with anticipation and nerves. I lingered in the dining hall, unsure of where I was supposed to go or how to begin. The thought of approaching Jasmine for help crossed my mind, but a flicker of self-consciousness held me back. It was then that Jack appeared, his presence a welcome distraction. He entered with a group of advisors, his expression composed yet weary. Spotting him, I moved toward the drinks table, hoping for a moment of reprieve. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said quietly, his voice tinged with genuine regret. "I told them to let you rest, but I needed to stay awake," I replied, offering a small, rueful smile. "Though I'm not sure it would have made much difference. Today wasn't exactly my most productive." Jack's lips quirked into a half-smile. "Trent was impressed with your presentation earlier. You did well, better than most." His words brought a flicker of warmth to my chest. "Hopefully, that offsets my less-than-stellar performance in the library," Jack chuckled softly. "Funny thing about those notes, the ones about someone dozing off, they seem to have disappeared. A real mystery, isn't it?" A genuine laugh escaped me, and for a moment, the weight of the day's events felt lighter. "So, does that mean you're free tonight? I was hoping we could finally go ice skating." His smile faltered, and he glanced toward the group of advisors still gathered by the entrance. "I wish I could, but one of the advisors called in sick, and I've been assigned his duties for the evening." Disappointment threatened to spill over, but I forced a smile. "Maybe you could fake an illness yourself," I teased. Jack shook his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Tempting, but I don't think the prince would be too pleased." Well, tomorrow then? Tomorrow, he promised. After the feast we'll skate, and in the morning I'll help you with Kodiak. His words were a balm to my bruised spirits, and I nodded, a renewed sense of determination taking root. Tonight I would endure. Tomorrow held the promise of better things. My heart felt lighter for the first time in what seemed like ages. Maybe Jack didn't hate me after all. There was no way I could be the only one feeling this connection between us. That sounds wonderful, I replied, my voice softer than I intended, but full of hope. Jack gave me a small nod before returning to his group of companions. I quietly left through another door, holding tightly onto the bag Trista had left for me. My mind swirled with thoughts of what to do next. Could I possibly spend the night in the library? It seemed absurd, but I had no room, no place to go. The scribes or maids would surely find me there and insist I return to my quarters. But where would I tell them I belonged? Yet before I could even think about where to sleep, I had to deal with a bigger issue, convincing Prince Stephen to allow me to stay one more day. If I couldn't, everything I had endured so far would be for nothing. I wandered back into the now empty area where the day's activities had been held, hoping to find a quiet corner or an unused room where I could change clothes. As I explored, I stumbled upon a small room that had a display of cosmetics, hair tools, and luxurious fabrics. Inside, there was a single lady-in-waiting sitting on a stool near one of the mirrors, looking utterly bored. "Hello," I greeted cautiously, stepping into the room. Her face lit up with interest, and she stood quickly. "Oh." "Hello, would you like to get ready for the ball here?" she asked eagerly. "Yes, that would be lovely," I said, glancing around the room. "Where is everyone else?" She gave a slight shrug. "Most of the other girls chose to prepare in their rooms. They wanted more privacy. I can help you, though. I know all the latest hairstyles and beauty trends." "That sounds perfect," I said gratefully, setting down my bag with Trista's borrowed dress. I took a seat in front of the mirror, deciding that my freshly cleaned dress from earlier would suffice for tonight. "My own cosmetics were damaged during my journey, and I wasn't sure what to do. I'm so glad you're here." The lady-in-waiting introduced herself as Helena. She chatted cheerfully as she worked, curling my hair into soft waves and applying rouge to my cheeks. "I can't believe the other girls passed up this opportunity," she said with a laugh. I smiled. "Their loss is my gain." Helena nodded in agreement and added the final touches just as the ball was about to begin. She stepped back, admired her work, and then shooed me toward the hallway. I joined the group of about 30 other girls, all heading toward the ballroom. As I walked, I didn't even notice who was in front of me until she turned around. It was Valia. "I saw you earlier," she said, slowing her steps to match mine. "Yes, I saw you too," I replied cautiously, unsure of how to respond. Valia wasn't as cruel as Vanessa or my stepmother, but she had a way of spilling secrets to them that made me wary. "I'm glad you're safe," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry about what happened before." "You mean when you left me stranded in the forest?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She flushed, her cheeks turning a shade of pink that only made her look more beautiful. I found myself hoping that Jack had truly meant it when he said Valia wasn't his type. "I didn't want that to happen," she said. "I told them not to, but—" "I know," I said, cutting her off. A part of me wanted to forgive her, but the memory of being left alone, surrounded by wolves, was still too fresh. "Mama means well," Valia continued hesitantly. "You and she are actually very similar, you know." Her words struck a nerve. "It's hard to believe that when she shut down my school and nearly got me killed by wolves," I said coldly. "I've never behaved like that. Excuse me." I walked away, leaving Valia looking upset, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I entered the ballroom, making my way to the refreshment table. The drinks and sugary treats offered little comfort. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Valia trying to approach me again. This time, Vanessa caught up to her, whispering something. After a quick glance in my direction, Valia turned and didn't try to come closer. The ball itself felt like a blur. My anger toward my stepfamily consumed me, making it hard to focus on anything else. Prince Stephen danced with each of us in turn, but it felt mechanical, as though he was fulfilling an obligation. Afterward, the advisors and other gentlemen began choosing partners for additional dances. Jack was among them, but something about his demeanor was different. The girls he danced with seemed distant, barely touching him more than they had to. As I watched, questions filled my mind. Why wasn't Jack asking me to dance? Did he sense my feelings and want to keep his distance? Did he feel differently and not want to lead me on? Or was he embarrassed to be seen with me, dressed so simply and without even a place to call my own? Regret washed over me. Perhaps I should have worn the elegant gown Trista had lent me after all. The questions gnawed at me throughout the evening, and my hunger and exhaustion only made them worse. By the time the final chime signaled the end of the ball, I felt utterly defeated. As the advisors left, Jack didn't so much as glance in my direction. Valia whispered a quick, "Good night," as Vanessa dragged her away, her nose in the air. The other girls, laughing and chatting, headed to their rooms, kicking off their shoes and sighing in relief. I lingered in the ballroom, unsure of where to go. While the others had warm beds and comfortable rooms waiting for them, I had nothing. I overheard a girl chatting with her friend as they passed the staircase leading to the living quarters and headed toward the dining hall instead. "If they still have hot cocoa like last night, I won't say no," she said with a laugh. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of warm cocoa, but my stomach growled louder, reminding me that my most pressing need was to find something more substantial than the delicate sweets that had been offered at the ball. Feeling the gnawing hunger in my stomach, I decided to follow the two girls, hoping to find something to fill me up. As I entered the dining hall, I found that there wasn't anything hearty to eat, but there was a large tureen of creamy soup, decorated with a pair of carved turtle doves on its lid. It wasn't much, but it would do. The other girls seemed in a hurry to finish their meals and get some rest after the evening's events. They quickly ate and left, eager to escape the long hours of socializing. I, on the other hand, lingered over my soup, my thoughts swirling as I pondered my predicament. I had no room of my own, no way of finding a quiet corner to rest, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would be noticed if I snuck into the servants' quarters. At home, those were shared spaces, but here, everything seemed different. The other maids would definitely notice if someone unfamiliar just appeared in their midst. I tried to think of another option. Maybe I could find an empty room? If only I could find one that wasn't being used. But how could I do that without drawing attention to myself? I knew I had to be careful, especially with Octavius watching. The thought of getting caught made my heart race. I had to be smart about this. But just as quickly, that idea shriveled and died. Guards were everywhere, constantly patrolling the halls. They opened doors to check the rooms, making it nearly impossible to hide. I couldn't risk being found curled up in a random corner of the castle. The only places that seemed open to everyone were the large communal rooms, like the ballroom and activity chambers, but none of those would work for me. Each of the other contestants had keys to their own private rooms, and I had nothing. As I was lost in thought, a sudden gust of snow flurried in as the side yard doors blew open. Two girls, holding mugs of hot cocoa, squealed as the cold air hit them, and they quickly ran away. Without thinking, I jumped up to help the guard who had rushed over to close the door. Together, we managed to get it shut against the howling wind. "Sorry about that, miss," the guard said apologetically, his breath visible in the cold air. "It isn't even fit for dogs to be out in this foul weather." "Of course not," I laughed, though I felt a chill run through me as I stood there. Once the guard returned to his post, I hurriedly finished my soup, grabbed my bag, and dashed through the castle, desperate to escape the cold and find somewhere warmer. The wind was fierce, and it cut through my cloak like a blade, making me shiver all over. I finally reached the courtyard and pushed forward through the gale, my head bowed against the biting wind. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, but I kept going, determined to find warmth. Soon I made my way to the dog yard, a familiar place that would offer some comfort. The barking and howls of the sled dogs greeted me before I even reached the barn. I shushed the dogs as I entered the barn, closing the door behind me to block out the freezing wind. Each dog had its own stall, neatly labeled with a carved plaque bearing its name. They all jumped up and down excitedly, eager to see the newcomer. "Shh," I whispered again, trying to calm them. They'll hear you! The warmth from the dogs was immediate, and it made the small barn feel like a haven compared to the harsh weather outside. Blankets were hung on the walls, and I grabbed one, quickly wrapping it around myself. I hung my bag on a hook and then reached into a sack for some dog treats. The dogs were ecstatic, but I fed each one carefully, giving them all a treat. Ace, in particular, was so excited he nearly started frothing at the mouth, his energy practically vibrating through the air. I couldn't help but smile at him, knowing he needed a run soon. Cinder, on the other hand, was calm, sitting quietly in her pen. Her tail wagged gently, and her eyes locked onto mine as I approached. "I pick you," I said softly, opening her stall door. She sniffed at me before settling next to me as I lay down on the clean, straw-covered floor. The barn wasn't the most comfortable place to sleep, but it would do. I draped the blanket over myself and Cinder, one arm thrown around her as she curled up next to me. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it would have to do for now. I knew I would probably look strange the next day with straw sticking in my hair. But at least I would have another day to search. The dancing had gone well enough, I hoped, but there were still too many unknowns. The library hadn't given me the answers I needed, and now my best bet was to figure out a way into the records room. I knew the women were told we could explore the castle, but all that really meant was we were allowed to wander through a few unlocked rooms that were filled with other girls, busy with their embroidery or drawing. I didn't need to pass the time with idle hobbies. I needed to find answers. Cinder shifted slightly, her warm body pressing against mine, and I couldn't help but think of Kodiak. He had always been my rock, my constant in uncertain times. Soon I would be able to see him again, and I couldn't wait for that moment. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the dogs and the warmth of Cinder's body lull me into a peaceful sleep, even if it was temporary. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but I would face them with determination.